For those of you who are at home, there's a bunch of people taking some difficult person tests, so hopefully you will be easy on me today and just put your tests away here and let's get started. So we were talking about the immune system yesterday. Today we're going to dive down into some of the nitty gritty of the immune system. But it will be very useful next week, especially when we start talking about SARS and cytokine storms and what's going on with vaccination. So we know that the reason a vaccination works is because when you are infected by an organism, you create those memory cells so that the next time you get infected, you can mount this immune response much quicker. And yes, you might have some what we call side effects. I don't know if you read my little announcements yesterday. But it's just really your immune system working quickly, ramping up to fight off that invader. So how does this antibody work? We talked about these B cells, they're going to fight off this invader because they make antibodies. And we know their shape is going to match the shape of these invaders. So what actually does an antibody do? It can work by several different mechanisms. One is, as you can kind of see in this picture here on the right, that because the antibody is Y-shaped, one antibody can hang on to one invader and it can hang on to a second invader. And then a second antibody can hang on to a third invader as well as that second invader, and so on, so that all these invaders get clumped together. And once they're clumped together or kind of agglutinated together, a white blood cell, a macrophage, will come up and engulf them and digest them. Another thing that here you can kind of see that macrophage coming up and engulfing, well, in this case, it's just engulfing an invader that's been tagged or kind of flagged by those antibodies. Another thing that the antibody can do is that it will kind of cover up those antigens that are on your invader so that they can't match with the receptor that's on the cell. And I'll show you that in a little video clip here in just a second. Another way that antibody works is once that antibody is attached to an invader, that stuff that I called complement, that I said was really technical, and all these proteins, that will help the complement recognize that this is an invader and now start to shoot the holes, create the pores in that invader so the contents will leak out. So antibody can do its job in a number of ways. So here's just a nice little picture that I found for SARS-CoV-2. Here would be the SARS-CoV-2 virus. These would be the antibodies that you create against it. It's blocking those antigens so that they cannot match with the receptor. And therefore, it's that virus is not going to get into your cells if it doesn't have access to the receptor. And here's just a pretty little animation, kind of shows how these antibodies will work. So that would be an invader. Those would be antigens. These would be the receptors. The invader needs to match with the receptor in order for it to cause an effect on your cells. But the antibodies now will come up, block those antigens, and now they will not fit into that receptor. And then they're flagged, and the macrophage will come up and engulf it. Yeah. Yes. And I think we're actually gonna skip that. Now, there are this duality between invaders and then the defense that has been evolving. You do this, I do that. You do this, I do that. So there's always this back and forth. And so this is a cute little trick that the hepatitis B virus has evolved to do.
Hepatitis B virus infects liver cells, but this virus has a secret weapon. Along with new whole virus particles, the virus also generates a huge number of excess surface proteins.
So these are like just loose antigens.
Proteins don't cause
throws
disease,
them out there,
but they do attract antibodies. As many as 500 quadrillion of these proteins flood the bloodstream, distracting antibodies designed to neutralize the whole virus. But instead of directly attacking the whole virus, antibodies are diverted by the overwhelming number of surface particles, often allowing the whole virus to escape and go on to infect other liver cells. It's a cunning defense. But Maurice Hilleman saw these excess
And then they
particles.
started going on to other things. But so it's kind of tricky the way that that virus has evolved to release just the proteins, which aren't going to harm anything at all. But now your antibodies attach to those excess proteins instead of to the virus itself. All right, now we're going to delve into the nitty gritty of what's going on with these components of the immune system and how do they kind of work together and how do they communicate. And next week, we'll come back to some of these components. So stay with me. We're going to talk about macrophages. We're going to talk about T helper cells and the relationship between the macrophage, the T helper cell, and then the two kinds of cells that directly are going to fight off these infections, which are the cytotoxic T cells and the B cells. So here we go. Here's a macrophage. So this is that big eater cell. It's the first one to encounter the invader. Here it is coming up, surrounding it. A little phagocytosis is going on. It brings that invader into the cell itself and it chews it up, like with a lysosome. So there are little bits of that invader inside of this macrophage. And then the macrophage does something a little weird. It actually takes those pieces of the invader and displays them on the outside of its cell.
Like heads on spikes on the outside of the city.
Yes. Never used that analogy before, but I'll have to remember that one. Yes. Heads on spikes outside the city. Yes. So instead of spikes, it's using another protein called the MHC protein. My analogy would be the MHC protein is more like a flagpole, and then the antigen is the flag, the foreign flag that's being waved. So we're going to run into these things called MHC. They have a long name. They're called major histocompatibility complex. The purpose of those is to have a device that the cell can use to display these foreign antigens. So the macrophage is now using these, there's going to be a class 1 and a class 2. So it's kind of using class 2 to display these foreign fragments. And that's going to help alert some of the other parts of the immune system. So that's one thing that's happening. Now there are two different classes of these MHC markers. The one we just showed was MHC2. That's on a macrophage. That's on part of the immune system. These MHC2 are displaying the foreign antigens so that things in the immune system can see them. When your own body cells, so like your liver or your kidney or your brain or your, part of your body is actually infected, your lungs are infected by this invader, some virus, your body cell will try to chew it up too and then display those antigens, just like the macrophage, on another MHC molecule. This one happens to be called number 1, probably the order in which they were discovered. But it's a similar kind of thing. It's going to be the flagpole or the spike that's going to show the foreign head or the foreign antigen right there. And what it's displaying too is your other parts of the immune system. So just as a heads up, for your body cells, that MHC1 will be recognized by your cytotoxic T cells. These are killer cells. They're going to be looking for that particular invader. And when they match, like you see in this picture, that's going to cause this cytotoxic T cell to release little bullets called perforin molecules. And they come out here like this, they go in that direction, and they literally shoot holes in your body cell, trying to destroy your body cell so that it can't be used as a vehicle to make more of those viruses. So on the other side of things, when this MHC2 here is displaying the foreign antigen and it matches a helper T cell, that's going to stimulate this macrophage to release there we go, to release cytokines.
This is for class 1 still.
This is class 2.
Ah,
So this is class 2. So cytokines are molecules of communication. They're like neurotransmitters. They're like hormones, but they're within this immune system. They're going to trigger other immune cells to do something. And so one of the things we're going to talk about next week is a cytokine storm. You may have heard of that. That's one of the things that can happen with someone who's infected with SARS-CoV-2. So in our picture, what we should kind of show here is there's a release of these cytokines from this macrophage. These happen to be called interleukin-1, and they're going to stimulate that helper T cell to do something. So in a moment, we'll talk about what that something is, but first step here is just to know that we're going to release the cytokines. So as I just said, a cytokine is just a molecule like a hormone that's being released from one kind of a cell. This would be our immune system cells, and it's going to have an effect on another cell. So in this case, it might be the macrophage having an effect on the T helper cell. So what are these T helper cells? We talked a little bit about them before. They are the ones that are this link between the B side of things that makes the antibodies and the T cell side of things that actually destroys infected cells. So the first step that's going to happen in our immune system is the macrophage engulfs the invader. Then it displays that antigen from the invader, and it communicates to the T helper cell with the cytokines. So here they come. Here are the molecules, these cytokines that say, T helper cell, your receptor matches the shape of this invader, so you're the one that needs to get active. Okay.
but that's only for class 2.
These would be the class 2, that's right. These would be the class 2. So now the T helper cell responds in a similar way by releasing a different cytokine. Might be helpful maybe if we name the cytokine so that we just can say a different one. This first one that the macrophage releases is called interleukin-1. So that's an example of a cytokine, and it's what the macrophage releases. The T helper cell is going to release, I'll call it IL-2, interleukin-2. And now it does 3 things. 1, that IL-2 is going to stimulate the B cell. So remember, we saw the B cell earlier communicated or interacted with the antigen, with the foreign invader, the antigen. It also needs to get stimulated by this IL-2. So it's a combination of both of those things. It also, this IL-2, will also stimulate the cytotoxic T cell. So this is that link. T helper cell is linking together the two sides of the immune system. And then the third thing that the IL-2 does is it comes back and communicates with itself. And what that causes that T helper cell to do is to proliferate, which means really just to divide and make many copies of itself, T helper, T helper, T helper, so that each of these can now go look for other macrophages that might be displaying its specific antigen and then release more IL-2. So it's a way to ramp up this response much more quickly. So the T helper cell is this link. I'm going to show you the next picture here, and it looks like there's more stuff, but basically we're seeing our macrophage, and the macrophage is engulfing the invader, stimulating it to release the interleukin-1, so this is the IL-1, and also displaying the antigen. So the T helper cell that matches is going to come under the influence of that IL-1, start to proliferate and make the IL-2, make that second cytokine, which you can see stimulates itself, stimulates the TC cells, and stimulates the B cells. And now our immune system is really on its way. All right, I think we get the what they're doing. So here's a nice picture then. What do those cytotoxic T cells do? So I kind of alluded to this a moment ago. When the cytotoxic T cell has its receptor that matches that MHC1 on an infected body cell that's displaying the antigen, that's going to stimulate it to release those perforins, these chemicals that are going to shoot the holes. You can see them well illustrated here. It's going to blow the holes in those invaders, and all the contents of that bacterium is going to leak out, and voila, you have, or sorry, really shouldn't say bacterium, I should say your body cell. It's going to kill your body cell so that the invader cannot continue to replicate and make more copies of itself. So that's our cytotoxic T cell. It is, by the way, just as an aside, these guys are also instrumental in fighting off cancers. Every now and then, your body actually has cancers that arise, but your cytotoxic T cells can recognize those in many cases. And so you don't actually get a lot of cancers that you potentially could do.
With people who have like diagnosed cancer that their cytotoxic T cells don't recognize it?
It can be that, that's right, that they're not displaying the right molecules for that to get recognized. And then there are a lot of interesting treatments. I don't know if we'll have time to talk about it in here, but they're actually generating T cells. They'll take like the patient's T cells out, they'll engineer them so they will recognize the cancer, and they'll put them back in the body. You might have heard of CAR therapy, some of the newest stuff that's happening. Yeah, it's working quite well, actually. Oops, let's go here. I don't know. I'm feeling pretty comfortable that that made sense. That whole kind of, we got the macrophage engulfing, showing the antigen, stimulating the helper T cells, and then those in turn stimulating the B and the cytotoxic T cells. Are we comfortable with that? Okay, let's go on then. I know it says tomorrow there, but it's really today.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Before I forget, I was confused about on Canvas. It says not this. Do the handout for activity located here, and then there's like an optional link before, like or after it. Like, what do you want us to do?
What day? Tell me what day you're talking about.
Do tomorrow. Like it says, read this online. Chapman case studies. Not this. Do this.
But there's a reading of both though. I think that's the one thing for home.
Okay, let
Okay,
Dr.
sorry.
Smith take a look at
Okay,
it.
sorry, I just wanted to
We'll
make
go
sure.
ahead forward and talk a little bit more about organ transplantation, and we'll straighten it out before you leave class. At least we'll do our best. Or we'll send you an announcement right after class. How's that sound? Okay, so now you know the background for the immune system. So an organ that you could receive, a liver, a lung, a kidney, skin, face, that's a foreign thing. And of course, if you get somebody else's kidney, it's got other antigens than your body recognizes. And so we want to look at what do we need to know in order to do an organ transplant. First thing, before you can transplant an organ, is you have to know a little bit about blood types. So blood types totally have to do with antigens and antibodies. So you might know what your blood type is. You might have blood type A or blood type B or blood type AB or O. So what does that actually mean? Well, there are antigens on your red blood cells. These are just molecules you make. So if you're type A, that means you display the A antigen. If you're B, you have the B antigen. And if you're AB, you happen to have both the A and the B antigen. And if you're type O, you don't display either the A or the B. And remember, an antigen is just a molecule against which you will make antibody. So let's look here for a second. The antigen on type A is A, and on B it's B, and on AB it's A and B, and on blood type O, it's neither A or B antigen. You don't have any antigens on those cells. Now, opposite to that, you're going to make antibody against any antigen that you don't have. So type A blood won't make anti-A, but it will make anti-B. If you're type B blood, you will make anti-A, at least if you're exposed to that blood type, you will. If you're type AB, since you have both antigens on your cells, you're not going to make either of those antibodies. Oh, that's kind of nice. And then type O, you don't have any antigens on your cells, so you will make anti-A and anti-B. Now, when we look at transplants, what we have to be careful of, we have to kind of make sure we don't match someone who's going to get an A organ with someone who makes anti-A. So what's important in the receiver is what antibody they have, and what's important in the donor is what antigen they have. So for example, let's look at type A blood. It has the A antigen, so it can give to anything that doesn't make anti-A. So can it donate to A? Sure. Can it donate to B? No, because the anti-A and B would agglutinate that blood. So it can't give to B. Can it give to AB?
Yeah.
Sure. Can it give to O? No, because that's got anti-A. So likewise for B, we would have B and AB. Now let's look at blood type AB. It doesn't have, it has the A antigen and the B antigen. Whoa, that's not so great for donating. So it can only donate to itself. Whoops.
How come it couldn't donate to A or B? Like, how come it goes one way but not the other?
Right, that's a great question. Hang on for just a second and I'll answer your question. So let's look at O. So O doesn't have any antigens, so it doesn't matter what antibodies are in the receiver because they're never going to agglutinate. So O can give to A and B and AB and O. So Madison just asked the question, how come you can go one way but not the other? So let's look at who you can receive from. It'll a little bit answer that question, but not totally. So you can receive from any blood type for which you don't make the antibodies, okay? So type A can certainly get it from A. It makes anti-B, so nothing that has the B can't receive any of those. So it could get O, because its antibodies won't agglutinate the O blood cells because there's nothing there to stick to. So likewise, B could do B and O. Now AB has no antibodies. So whatever comes in, AB is not going to fight them off, so it can get A and B and AB and O. But poor O over here, it makes anti-A and anti-B. So no matter what blood type it would get, except for its own, it would clot it up. So you've got your universal receiver, your universal donor. This would be the universal receiver. This would be the universal donor. Now, another part of the answer to your question is, let's say that I am, where do I want to say this? Okay, so let's say that I want to diffuse or transfuse really, A, and A can go into AB. But A could make anti-B. So why is that okay? And the reason is this: the AB person is not going to make antibody, and they would be making a lot of it. The blood that you would receive in this pint of blood, there would be very few antibodies in there. And it's not going to make any more. So these would be so dilute that it wouldn't really matter that you're getting a few of those antibodies. If possible, they will always transfuse A to A and B to B whenever possible. They won't try to mix, but that's the other part of the answer to your question. And then it gets more complicated than that. You've probably heard that you're not just type A or B, but you might be type positive or negative. It has to do with another antigen that's on your red blood cells, but it works pretty much the same way. Different blood types have different frequencies throughout the world, which is kind of interesting. So this is a map that shows you where blood type, or let's say where the B allele is most common. You can see here that, or at least originally in North America, very, very low values for the B allele, tended to be on the other continents. Here's the A allele, much more common kind of throughout the world, although basically nothing in South America. And then we're looking at type O. Type O, nobody's got the B, A, or B allele. It is, luckily for now, when we need to do transfusions, it is the most common kind of blood type. Here in the United States, O is first, A is second, B is third, and then AB is pretty rare. So there are different frequencies. Now, why do I bring that frequency up? Because when you have to match blood types, when you're doing organ transfusion, if you don't have a matching blood type, then the chance that if you need an organ, it's going to be much harder to find an organ for you. So remember, type O could donate to anybody, but to receive an organ, it takes much longer. They'll be on the wait list for an organ, 5 to 9 years, compared to if you were type AB, you'd only be on a wait list on average, at least in 2011, for a little less than 2 years. So those are a significant piece of information. So that's one thing we need to know when you transplant an organ, is what blood type are you? Second one is these MHC antigens. And of course, biology is notorious for changing languages and terms. When you go from the general world of animals to people, we call them something else. So in people, these MHCs are often called HLAs.
Not the same as HeLa cells?
As HeLa cells? No, not the same as HeLa cells, no. These are, I think these are human leukocyte antigens. So it's the antigens that are on these, leukocyte is a kind of a white blood cell. So the antigens that are on your white blood cells. So there are 6 important ones that we need to try to match when we do an organ transplant. And you might share, because they're genetically determined, you may share some or all of these antigens, certainly with your parents. You should share at least half of them with your parents, because you're getting half your genes from your parents. But among your siblings, on average, you're going to share about 25%. You could share more, you could share all of them, but not necessarily. So let's take a look here. This just kind of shows you, let's say that these were a couple of parents here, and they've got their different antigens on their cells. Here we can see one chromosome from dad, one chromosome from mom, or sorry, from his other chromosome from dad. And then you have the mom, and she has her 2 chromosomes. So a child, if we looked at child 1, he could get this chromosome from his dad, and he could get this chromosome from his mom. So he's 50% related to each parent. And you can notice that child number 2 shares that same chromosome from dad, but got this chromosome differently from mom. So they share 50%, where this child over here shares this one because they got that one from mom. But over here, this kid got the other chromosomes from each parent and shares nothing with their sibling. So you could share all of them. You could share 50%, you might share 25%. So on average, it's about 25% among siblings. So we often go to relatives first when we're trying to find a possible organ. I will point out that the chance that you're going to find a totally matching donor in the population is rare because for each of these genes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for each of these things, there are huge numbers of alleles. So you saw there kind of an A1, A2, A3. That means there's an A 425, and there's a C 108, and a B 289. So the chance that a stranger is going to have all 6 of those that match with you is not very strong, but it can happen. Luckily, we don't necessarily have to match all 6. The more we match, the better the transplant will take. The third thing we do before we transplant an organ is to make sure that the person receiving the organ is not already sensitized to the antigens in the incoming organ. So let's say, for example, that I was 20 years old and I needed a blood transfusion for whatever reason, and I got one from Peyton. Okay. So now my body has been exposed to Peyton, and it might recognize some of her antigens. So now, 40 years later, I need a kidney transplant, and unfortunately, Peyton died in a car crash. But she luckily had signed her license so that she donated her kidney, and they were going to see if I could take her kidney. So they would test to see if I cross-reacted with her, and I probably would because I'd already gotten some blood from her, and so I wouldn't be able to receive her kidney. So they'd give her kidney to somebody else. But that's something that's immediate. If you give a kidney to somebody who you have this cross-matching, within hours they will reject it. It's a hyperacute kind of a reaction.
Why would they reject something that they've like recognized before?
Oh, because of the memory cells.
Oh, because for
Yeah.
them, it could be like a virus or something.
Yes,
That's smart.
that's right.
Mm.
That's right. And when you get a blood transfusion, that doesn't stay in your body very long, so it doesn't really affect you. But now the organ
So like it's really a bad idea if you were AB and you got blood transfusions from like A, B, and O. Did that like screw you over later in life?
It could, yes, it could.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So they'd want to avoid those kinds of things when possible. So the other thing to encourage besides organ donation is donate your blood so that they have plenty of blood and they've got enough ABs and Os and As to give to those people who need them.
Wait, but like, sorry.
That's okay.
What happens if like you've gotten like, you know, a bunch of not however many like transplants and like there's no blood type left for you.
Okay. So Madison is asking, what if you've had a bunch of transplants and now you've so you've had 3 different transplants. You know, it's possible they're not be an organ for you. You may no longer be able to get a transplant. That is absolutely possible. Hopefully you won't need 3 different transplants. Okay, luckily, the other thing that researchers have discovered and worked hard to develop are immunosuppressive drugs. So just like their name says, they suppress or quiet or prevent the immune system from acting like it should, which also means when you have to be on immunosuppressive drugs, you have to be super careful. So we're going to have a guest speaker come in and you can ask him about immunosuppressive drugs. They also have to be very careful in something like the pandemic, because if they are now infected with that virus, just generally, you know, there are actually people who can't get vaccinated because they might be on immunosuppressive drugs. That's right. That's why the rest of us who are healthy should absolutely get vaccinated.
So you have to be on it your whole life.
Yes, you need to be on those immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of your life. So they are tamping down your immune response. They're preventing you from mounting an immune response. That's what their job is.
But why would someone do that?
Because now I have a kidney, right? And it's got we matched 4 of my markers, but there's still 2 on there. Well, I don't want my immune system now to attack this new kidney that I've got. So that's why you would want to have them. just a couple of graphs that are going to show us some relationships to what works well, what kind of characteristic it leads to a successful transplant. So here on this x-axis, this is showing us how many 0 to 1, 2 to 3, 4 to 5, and 6 of those antigens match. If you can match all 6, much longer expectancy for the life of that transplant. So try to match as many as we can. Pardon me?
I thought you said that was super duper rare though.
Well, but if you can do it,
Okay.
yeah, right.
So-
Just it's rare doesn't mean that it's not good. So,
I meant like, I didn't know if they would actually have data because you said. it was
oh,
so rare.
yeah, yeah. So I guess it's not, they do have data. I guess that's what we should say. So now you can get organs, not everything. You couldn't get a heart, but you can get organs from living donors. So we saw in that video that I showed you at the beginning of our unit, how there were living people who were donating one of their kidneys. If you can get a living kidney, a kidney from a living donor, that's going to be more successful than if you get it from a deceased donor. So there isn't any downtime for that kidney when it wasn't in a person. Phoebe.
And is there a distinction here between living in like the biological sense and living in the more complete like societal and biological sense? Like my aunt, her liver's from a kid who was brain dead. Does that count as a living donor? No.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I would say that counts as a living donor because it has never lost its blood supply.
Gotcha.
So as opposed to someone who was in a motorcycle accident, now there's been a period of time when their heart wasn't beating, and so the kidney was without a blood supply for a period of time. This one was, for kidneys, you can be on dialysis and you can live on dialysis for many, 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 many years before you get a kidney transplant. If you can prevent living on dialysis for a while and get that transplant early in your kidney disease, you have a better outcome than if you need to be on dialysis. Dialysis is not perfect. There are side effects of needing to be on dialysis. If you can get a transplant from a younger donor rather than an older donor, so if you had a choice between getting my kidney and getting Peyton's kidney, you'd be better off getting Peyton's kidney because it has a longer life, which kind of makes sense. My kidney's been around for 65 years. Yours has only been there for 18 years. And this was, I think this is, this is showing you getting a kidney that gets matched through that National Kidney Registry. And so there, remember, they're trying to maximize your number of antigens that match. So very, very successful. We won't even talk about this. This was interesting. Some countries have an opt-in system. We have an opt-in system for we have to sign our driver's license. Other countries have an opt-out system so that you are assumed to be a donor unless you say no. And this shows you where people are willing to donate. And this shows you, like in Spain, that has this opt-out, way more transplants can occur because you've got more donors. And this will be touched on when we have Dr. Chapman come tomorrow. He'll talk about the MELD score and what's going on. All righty. Thank you.
Thank you.
Got a good background for tomorrow.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
This day is O positive the blood that can like give? Or is that-
No, you would want O negative blood, because negative means you don't have the antigen on the white blood cell. Yeah.
Thanks, sister.
All righty.
Yesterday during class, Allie texted me and she was like, "Did you give me a kidney?" Anyway, I thought you needed to know.
And your answer
She was
was?
like, maybe. I said if she needed it and we were matches, but like she seemed really excited to give me a kidney. No, but you like said it.
Anyways, you didn't get kidney? We're like dying. We're dying.
Does he want to come back in, Ollie?
No, I let him in and he didn't go away from your screen.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, I give you.